man, take two. So, oh yeah, we're still trying to figure out this new software. Sorry. Welcome everybody to the Air War podcast presented by Pursuit Picks Media, and we are back. Sorry for the delay. I've got my computer sitting right there. My old computer sitting right there behind me. It tanked, so I had to get a new one, and that obviously backed up our production schedule. And now we're trying to play catch up. But this is a pretty exciting episode of the Air War podcast. Because at the time of this recording, we are 1 week away from the 80th anniversary of D-Day, June 6th, 1944. And Sam and I figured that, well, if we better get our heads out of our asses and with a banger of an episode, since we've been off the air for, I think it's the end of the last episode of Masters of the Air, which that was the end of March, I think.
Yes. So
yeah.
It's about 2 months or so.
Yeah. So we've decided to each pick a topic that we did not tell each other about before this. So this should be a lot of fun. I'm really
unless we did
forward.
the same thing, then we're both going to look like idiots.
I seriously doubt it.
Believe me, I've been very obscure.
Because I've got and I have too. There's some original content with mine. So if you're gonna go first, and if you end up having the same thing as me, there's gonna be some real problems. So on that note, let's go ahead and start off with Sam's topic for D-Day.
So all I got was a message from Mitch saying, "Let's do D-Day in the air," and not tell anyone. So I was like, one, I don't want to do the same, and two, if you've gathered anything about me from these podcasts so far, I like the obscure, I like the out of the mainstream. So I've decided to do the air transport operations for Tonga and Mallard.
That's a good one.
Yes, and say because it's like, for example, I went on to YouTube, typed in Operation Tonga and Mallard, and all that comes up is Call of Duty Vanguard. That's it.
Yeah, right.
So I was like, no, someone needs to talk about this. So Tonga and Mallard, for those that don't know, are the British airborne operations on June 6th. Well, the last few hours of June 5th, June 6th, and a few minutes into June 7th. And it's the transportation of British 6th Airborne Division over to France to complete its objectives. So when looking at D-Day, obviously you've got to go back several months in time. And planning for the original for the airborne operations for D-Day originally consisted of one American airborne division and a British brigade group, which was 3rd Airborne Brigade with an anti-tank battery. But the commander of 6th Airborne Division, Richard Gale, he didn't believe his division could accomplish all its objectives with just that brigade group, so he went to Frederick Boy Browning, commander of 1st Airborne Corps, and said, I need my full division. So that was granted without consultation with the RAF, which means Trafford Leigh-Mallory, the Supreme Air Commander for D-Day, has to try and find enough transport for 2 American divisions and a British airborne division, and it's just, I can just imagine his reaction when he's told that.
It's a tall task.
Yeah. I mean, it was such a tall task that the RAF had one air transport group in Britain at the time. They had to create a completely other group with 8 squadrons just to fulfill the task. It was absolutely insane. So you've got number 38 group, which is the primary airborne moving group, and then you've got 46 group, which mainly deals with resupply and moving the more heavier stuff, the anti-tank guns, the artillery, and so forth. Very nice picture of a Dakota.
Yep.
And say, well, I'm going to come on to the Dakota actually, because 46 group, as it's only just been created, has to use Dakotas because it can't get enough British aircraft to fulfill the role.
So let's talk about let's cover just for like a minute so as an American, we pretty much associate the C-47 as the D-Day transport aircraft.
Yes.
For the airborne forces minus the Waco glider. Now the Brits used more than just the C-47.
Oh God, yes. And so the C-47 or the Douglas Dakota, as it's called in RAF service, was I think the second least used aircraft for the air operations.
Okay, I did not know that.
No, what the
That's
most
surprising.
it's a very close call between the Albemarle and the Short Sterling
Okay.
were the most common sort of aircraft, and then you've got some Halifaxes in there as well. And it's interesting you should mention the Waco glider because somehow 38 Group managed to get hold of 30 Waco gliders, which I have no idea how they got hold of them or why they used them.
Right.
In fact, I don't think they used them at all during the operation. And so out of the 10 squadrons, it's actually worth bearing in mind. It's actually worth going back and talking about. RAF groups and squadrons are very different to Army Air Force groups and squadrons. So, a American group, well, that's going to be about 40 aircraft altogether or so.
Yeah.
That's an RAF squadron.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, an RAF group is massive size. It's similar to an air division or maybe even a small
Like a combat
Air Force
wing or something.
Yeah, and so it's much bigger. And 38 Group up until D-Day was dropping SOE agents into France. It was supplying the French resistance, and it was also on occasion doing interdiction missions and attacking the French railway system. And training at the same time. These poor buggers were on 24-hour service constantly. I don't know when they slept. I honestly don't. It's absolutely insane. So, I've mentioned the two operations, Tonga and Mallard. So, Tonga was the parachute drops, which were conducted first. Although they did have some gliders involved, but only in small numbers for the divisional headquarters. The first chaps to drop, they were dropped by 295 Squadron in their Albemarles. These were also the chaps who delivered both the 22nd Independent Company, which is 6th Airborne's Pathfinders. And say, because they formed a special company. Oh, there we go. Horse glider, which I'm about to come on to as well. You're good timing at this today.
Yeah, trying to. And my wife is rocking a British Airborne hat there.
Oh, so. She is and all.
Yeah.
And say, well, because after they drop 22nd Independent Parachute Company, the next lads to go in about a few seconds later are Major Howard's D Company, the 2nd Oxen Bucks, to take over the Orne and Caen Canal bridges. Today we call them Pegasus Bridge and Horse Bridge. And then it all starts going a bit mad because different squadrons are dropping different battalions on different DZs at the same time. It's like, for example, I've got it written here if you'll bear with me a moment because I've got about 1,000 notes for this. So, here we are. So, at 11 on the 5th of June, 8 Albemarles leave Brize and Orton, carrying a company from the 8th Battalion of the Parachute Regiment and a company of the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, dropping over 2 different DZs at the exact same time. The organisation was a mess, an absolute mess, and it's no wonder various companies ended up completely in the wrong place. And also an interesting point, one of the most famous actions during Operation Tonga was the storming of the Melville Battery. And the reason why 9th Parachute Battalion, who was meant to take the battery, got completely scattered is because the Pathfinders that dropped in first got wiped out by RAF Lancasters that were attempting to strike the battery.
Oh, wow.
But completely missed and hit the Pathfinders. So that's why they get completely thrown about. So 38th Group is trying to drop 3rd and 5th Parachute Brigades and the divisional headquarters and anti-tank batteries. And as I've just said, they get scattered. And it's a miracle they managed to, because they do achieve all their objectives, and in their very great credit, they do manage to get themselves together and established. But I don't know how, because half the radios went missing. Divisional headquarters, when it did land at, I think it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, are completely scattered. Two of the gliders for the divisional headquarters are released in England. They hadn't even crossed the bloody channel and they released them in England for some ungodly knows reason.
So it's maybe like a navigational error or something.
I know, but how you didn't notice missing the channel, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
And say it's absolutely mind-boggling. And there's one interesting story. So the chaps who I mentioned, 22nd Independent Parachute Company, the Pathfinders, on their very first drop at 20 past midnight on the 6th, the chap who drops the first is a squadron leader, Merrick. Now, obviously, he's got a very difficult job because these are the very first Pathfinders to go in. He has to get them in the right spot. And sat next to him is Air Vice Marshal Honghurst, the overall commander of 38th Group. And I'm like, you've got a hard enough job anyway, and you've got the CO looking over your shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why did they let this man go? Because one, he's a very valuable asset. And two, you're only going to distract the pilots. I honestly don't know why they let him go. But Merrick runs the DFC for this. And say, because it is just a very valuable thing he's just done, is because he lands his Pathfinders exactly where they need to be without any guidance whatsoever. And say, and there's also one other chap I want to mention, because I've mentioned 46th Group. I can't find any information about them, sadly. It's just they're not talked about at all. And I think that's partly because they were only formed a couple of months before D-Day. So they haven't established themselves. And there is one chap whose name I just think is brilliant. Wing Commander, also a Lieutenant Colonel, Lewis Arben Strange, DSO, OBE, MC, DFC, and Bar.
Wow.
What a moniker that is.
He checked off all the boxes.
Oh, yes. And say he was one of the squadron commanders for the 46th. 46th. And the 46 was given the crappiest airfields. They were given C-47s, which had been basically used well past their service date. Mm-hmm. They hadn't been given refits. So he basically sent his squadron out to beg, borrow, and steal and everything they could off the 36th Group. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think 46th Group would have been ready for D-Day, which obviously would have had massive ramifications because you've got a whole transport group out of the line when you desperately need them. So Operation, as I said, Operation Tonga is the parachute landings. Operation Mallard happens much later in the day. It starts around 6 o'clock in the evening. And this is the glider transport. There we go. Again, your perfect timing.
I had a feeling this was going to come up.
Fortunately, you haven't got the same issues with navigation if you had with the glider landing, because obviously it's still daylight. Well, it's dusk, but you've got plenty of light to see.
Right.
But a lot of the landing zones, there's still German anti-aircraft batteries. So, although by some miracle a lot of the aircraft don't get hit, the gliders do take a pounding, because you've got horses, as you see there, and you also got the Hammockers, the heavy loading,
the big guys.
Yeah. I'm saying I want to come on to the Hammer cars because the Hammer cars brought the division's Recce Squadron, who are armed with Tetrarch light tanks, and it's the second and one of only 2 times they're in combat, the Tetrarchs. The other is in Madagascar, of all places, with the Royal Marine Division. And the landing for the reconnaissance squadron is a disaster. Some of the gliders with the Tetrarchs just crash on landing, and the tanks can't be salvaged. You've also got those that do land start to move out. One of them gets hit by another glider carrying a tank and flips the tank that's already on the ground.
Oh
and
wow.
so obviously that's useless. And then the tanks that do manage to get moving slightly get all parachute cords wrapped in the tracks, and the crews have to spend about half an hour cutting their way free of all that. And this sort of goes to show. And plus, when they do get in combat, they're just a bit useless, frankly. They're only tiny little things. But as a whole, the glider landings are a success. Apart from some losses of some gliders.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the most staggering thing about all of this is looking at 36 group losses. I only found about 8 to 12 aircraft that went down. During the entire June 6th, only 8 or 12. And I'm like, where are these massive casualties that the transport aircraft were meant to have taken? Because I can't see any evidence of it. And you've only got about 20 or so aircraft damage as well, but a few of them very mildly. And just for context, 9th Troop Transport Command, which does the American landings, they only suffer, I think it's around 30 aircraft lost altogether.
Yeah, it's not many.
No. And I'm like, I think this is one slight problem with media at the minute, is that they portray, obviously, Band of Brothers or what have you, it's all these aircraft getting shot down in balls of flame and everything. And I'm like, where's this happening? Where have they got this from?
Yeah, and I think the American drops, I think 75, it's somewhere around that, it's 75% or so were within a mile of the drop zone.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
This is what I've been finding is, yes, they were scattered, but they weren't scattered terribly. And so they do a fairly good job of keeping them close enough together.
Yeah.
And the only real exception to that rule is 9th Parachute Battalion going after Melville Battery. But obviously, as I've discussed, there's a good reason for that. Well, there's a sad reason for that anyway. But I'd say just when I was researching this, and it was just like, in the space of 24 hours, they've moved 3 airborne brigades, which are made up of 9 battalions altogether. The Divisional HQ, the Recce Squadron with 20 tanks, the Divisional Signals, the Royal Army Medical Corps with 3 ambulance companies, 4 batteries of artillery, 3 batteries of anti-tank guns, an anti-aircraft battery, 4 companies of the Royal Engineers, 2 companies of the REME, and 3 companies of the Royal Army Service Corps. All in the space of 24 hours, with very few casualties to the airborne forces and even less casualties to the crews of the aircraft. And it's just astounding.
The unsung heroes, man.
Definitely. And I haven't even got to talk about the Glider Pilot Regiment. But I'm sorry, I think that's a story for another day.
I think Glider Pilot Regiment will be a fun one to talk about when we get into September, and we'll have our market garden episodes. Not just an episode.
Don't steal my idea.
So that's what we'll do. Yeah, that's interesting stuff.
I was going to say I wanted to do something out of the ordinary and just not given the credit that it's deserved, really. And next year I'll do the Americans.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's interesting stuff. And my only familiarity with Tonga was Merville Battery, and other than Pegasus Bridge, which is probably some of the best flying in the whole war, because I think the first glider cut through the barbed wire. And the door on those, God, I just closed the photo, but the door on those horses is towards the front of the towards the nose of the aircraft.
Yeah.
And so when they landed next to Pegasus Bridge and cut through the barbed wire, the door was on the side it needed to be of the barbed wire for all those guys to get out and attack those positions.
Was absolutely astounding. Of the 6 gliders that went in, only 1 was in the wrong place, and that's because it accidentally overshot and went in the river. That's it.
And even then, those guys, I mean, there could be worse places to land than that.
Yeah. I'm saying the blokes still got out and went into the attack.
Yeah. In
I'd
fact,
say.
I have not been to the Pegasus Bridge Museum yet, but
Hmm.
that specific glider that you mentioned, I believe there's a Bren gun that they pulled out of the water, and that is on display at the museum. But I do
Oh,
remember, yeah,
that is awesome.
yeah, History Underground has a video on that, but there was a
Hmm.
Bren that was pulled out of one of those gliders that landed in the water. So I think
That's
that's the one you're
impressive.
talking about. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
really interesting stuff.
I'd
Okay,
say,
that was
well,
great.
that's me.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna share my screen here. Mine again, mine is specific like Sam's. So uh, this was sent to me from. Let me make sure I get this right. So this is from the Botisham Airfield Museum through their Instagram page. But I was researching a very particular Mustang, which we'll dive into on the next slide here. But this is the timeline of the 361st Fighter Group on D-Day, and they flew a total of 6 missions on D-Day, starting at 3 in the morning and finishing up at looks like 10 o'clock at night. Yeah, 2,200 hours. So yeah, 10
Yeah,
o'clock at
20 to
night.
11. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the 361st Fighter Group probably isn't as well known as some of the other 8th Air Force fighter groups, but their mission on D-Day was very specific to the American landing area. So they did a lot of strafing and bombing of German positions. And there was one particular Mustang that I wanted to highlight that's in this photo. This is a pretty well-known photo. This is the 361st taxiing out for their second or third sortie of the day on June 6,
Hmm.
1944. So this one particular Mustang right here is a P-51B, and the code markings are Echo 9 Romeo. And the reason I wanted to highlight that Mustang is because here's a better shot of it at a later date. So if you look at that photo, and then you look at this photo, that is 67 years after D-Day. I took that picture from a B-25, and that is the same exact Mustang.
Why do you have such cool stories?
So this P-51 served, I think it was 700 total combat hours with the 361st between 2 different pilots, which we'll highlight in a second.
Hmm.
But it had an engine failure in June of 1945, crashed in a field, and it sat there for about 60 years. Then it was recovered and restored, and this is what it looks like today, even though this photo was taken in 2011, but it still looks as pristine as it did in this set of photos. But this is it's painted on 2 sides because it was flown by 2 different aircraft. So one side is Impatient Virgin, and that particular aircraft was flown by Victor Boquin, and then the other side was Evoy, which I believe the name the abbreviation for that is Expected Value of Information, Evoy, and that was flown by John Bricker. So this photo was taken on the 70th anniversary of D-Day. We had a local D-Day commemoration about
Hmm.
40 minutes from my house, and so it flew with 2 other Mustangs that you can see here. But
Only
yeah,
one
that's
second invasion stripes. That's a shame.
yeah, I know it's too bad. But so this P-51 right here with the yellow and black checkers, that one was also a combat veteran Mustang as well, which we'll save that for another episode. But this is Impatient Virgin on the taxi back. But yeah, it's a pretty remarkable story. It's of all the Mustangs surviving today, this one probably has the most combat time by far.
Hmm.
And so this is a close up of the fuselage, and you can see First Lieutenant Victor E. Bachwin, and then he flew it as Echo 9 Romeo, which is what we're seeing it as painted now, right?
Yeah.
And he scored 5 kills with it. And then when it was later painted to Echo 9 Bravo, it was flown by John Bricker. One of the interesting things about Bricker is he flew this aircraft into December of 44. So these guys were still had P-51Bs in their group into late
Okay.
1944. The these 3 kills right here are all FW-190s. So it shot down 3 190s in a single mission on September 27th, 1944. That's an infamous mission for the 8th Air Force. It's known as the Castle mission. So this is where a group of B-24s had a navigational error. They got off course. They got separated from their fighter escort. And I think out of 25 aircraft, only 4 got home. It's one of the worst losses in a single day for one unit within the 8th Air Force.
And that's saying something when you consider the 8th record with this.
Yeah, and particularly at that point in time, because there's air superiority into the fall of 1944 for the Western Allies, and so to have that happen was absolutely disastrous and somewhat of a rarity at that point in the war.
Yeah.
But the cool thing about this Mustang is they tried to go as close as they can to its original state from 1945 minus the little GPS device that they have there. But so this is another photo that I took, and if anybody has a copy of this book, Mustang Thoroughbred Stallion of the Air by Steve Pace, you might have seen this photo because it actually ended up making it into this book.
Why do you have such cool stories?
You know what, man? It was a 1 in a million shot. I was really lucky. And Steve Pace, who's unfortunately, he's been deceased now for about 6 or 7 years, but Steve was a great guy, longtime aviation historian and author, all around super guy. He came across this photo on the internet and then was able to find out that I took it, and he sent me an email, and he's like, I'd love to get this in my book. So this is the book here, and then I'll flip to the page it's on. So, and then it was cool. It was cool because it made the color section of the book. So there it is. Actually, let me stop sharing my screen here. People get a better look at it. But there you go. So that's kind of my like little personal D-Day connection. We had that Mustang was part of a collection that unfortunately went through the owner went through some legal trouble recently, and because of something that was totally separate from the museum, and he through court disputes had a court order to where he had to pay back a certain amount of money, and the aircraft were part of the assets that would make up for that money. And so that Mustang just recently sold for $3 million, I believe. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I got to see that P-51 for about 12 years of my life on the regular every spring and summer when I would go to air shows around here. And so, it was really cool to get to experience that plane and know its history and share it with you. And it's a shame that it won't be around this area as much anymore, but I hope wherever it goes, people will appreciate it just as much, because there is a lot of significant history to that Mustang. And if I'm not mistaken, it flew 4 combat sorties on D-Day. It flew 4 of the 5 or 6 of the 361st flew on D-Day.
That's one of the things that amazed me when doing my research is these blokes were just around the clock flying.
Yeah.
Every Allied airman was just didn't stop. And
then they were going to keep going until the beaches were secured, right? That was the idea.
I was going to say that it makes me wonder if they considered drugging them up like they did several times.
Yeah, it certainly worked for D-Day when they gave those air sickness pills. But just absolutely remarkable. And the fact of the matter is, on D-Day there was very few Luftwaffe opposition to the landings, and that is owed to the airmen of the Western Allies. And we can't also forget the Soviet Union too. They played a huge part in decimating the Luftwaffe as well. So
mostly with Allied aircraft, but that's besides the
point. Ooh, you don't touch that hot take immediately. It's still burning. Ooh. Man, he said it, not me, just so we're clear.
Yeah, you can blame me.
So I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Air War Podcast. That was
I'd just like to say one more thing if I can. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's just that some of you might be aware, about a week ago now, the
Bud Anderson
Memorial flight. Oh,
yes. Okay, so let's 2 things. Go ahead and go with yours.
So with mine, Squadron Leader Mark Long flying a Spitfire,
Yeah.
sadly crashed. God, can you remember what date it was now?
I think that was last Saturday. So the
Yes.
25th of May, I believe.
Yeah. Unsay sadly got a bird strike. Was it just after taking off or just before
I
coming down?
I think so, just after takeoff.
Yeah. And that Spitfire was a D-Day veteran as well and a Battle of
Mm-hmm.
Britain veteran. So
Yep.
and so it's a sad loss for obviously the RAF and for the plane itself, sadly. But hopefully, at least the aircraft might come back to us.
Yeah,
Then
I
obviously,
certainly hope so.
yeah, and then obviously Bud Anderson as well.
Yeah, that was on May 17th. They released it on social media, and Sam and I were playing IL-2 Sturmovik, Great Battles at the
Yes.
time, and that was really shocking to hear. I had the opportunity to meet Bud in 2010, and I've got a signed copy of To Fly and Fight, which is a great book, and
Mhm.
people should pick that up when they get an opportunity. But Bud did fly on D-Day. His longest mission was 6 hours and 55 minutes, and I think that was on D-Day, and he claimed that he had another hour's worth of fuel if he wanted to keep on going. So just a remarkable man. AAA, 16 and a quarter kills with the 357th Fighter Group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that there's not many of these chaps left in it anymore.
Yeah, I think we're down to 3 fighter aces, American fighter aces from World
Yeah.
War II. 3 or 4.
Well,
It's dwindling for sure.
part of me wants to say we haven't got any, the RAF.
Yeah.
And say we might have one hidden away somewhere, but none that come to mind anyway. So
Yeah. Okay, well, Sam, thank you for bringing that up. I that would have been pretty bad of me to forget that, which I almost did. So thank you for doing that.
it's all right.
Okay, well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Air War Podcast, the D-Day 80th anniversary special, and we will catch you on the next episode. So thanks again for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next time.
It's all right.